Hi guys, my name is Bobby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm bringing you my favorite thrillers slash horror, I guess is the best way to put it. This was a video suggestion. I can't remember who suggested it, so I'm really sorry. I just made the list when you guys had all sent me the messages saying what you wanted. And if you're wondering where my November wrap-up is, I filmed it in my car after work one day, and it was terrible. And I decided not to refilm it because I only read 2 books in November. So November started out really, really good for me. I read Heir of Fire and Crown of Midnight by Sarah J Maas, which are books 4 and 5 of the Throne of Glass series. Sorry, my ring light is being a little weird. But anyways, so I read those. I read them in quick succession. It was great. I was so excited. My reading was going really well. And then everything tanked after that, which seems to be my MO in the past couple of months. I did read 200 pages into Fires of Vengeance, which is the sequel to Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. And that, I think, kind of threw me into a slump. I was buddy reading it with my friend Cindy, who finished it. I did not, because nothing had happened. It had been 200 pages and literally nothing had happened. It takes place right after the end of Rage of Dragons, which is great. So we pick up right where we left off. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, like when are we going to start getting the plot going again? And we really didn't. You get a little bit more world building and stuff like that. But other than that, like, I was just kind of like, eh. And she finished it and she said it suffers greatly from second book syndrome. So I was like, eh. So that's kind of put me off. So I haven't picked it back up. It's sitting over there. Like, I hope to finish it this month, but if I don't want to, I'm not gonna. I mean, the next book's probably not going to come out till next year or the year after. So, I mean, I can wait. It's not like it's a dire I have to read it right now, but yeah, so that one's sitting. So I didn't really get much read, and you know, I was like, you know what, I could refilm it, but why? And especially since I can't really talk about both books. Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows are books 4 and 5 in a series. I can't really talk about what happens in them because they're book 4 and 5 in a series. I just gave both of them 4 stars and I enjoyed reading them, and I'm going to continue on with Empire Storms this month. That's about all I got. So I didn't want to post a November wrap-up that was literally 4 minutes long of me just saying that. So that's where my November wrap-up is. It got trashed. So I read 2 books. But I decided instead, since I'm now a week late to post, because, you know, this is, again, becoming my MO, that I would pick one of the topics that you guys had asked me to do. My favorite thrillers and horrors. I don't think I've ever done a video like that. I was going to do thrillers because I think the suggestion was thrillers, but thrillers I'm very particular about, and I don't really like all that much because you have to really get me. Most of the time you don't. Like, I think the highest I've ever given a thriller is like 4 stars. That's actually considered a thriller. So I decided to throw horror in the mix a little bit to make it a little bit more interesting, and so I have more than like 2 books to talk about. So I actually have, 5 of them in physical form. Most of these are ebooks, and same with the list I have for my underrated books. A lot of them are ebooks because when I first started getting into reading again, Kindle Unlimited was my best friend, and that's where I read a whole bunch of these books. And like, the first book that I want to talk about, or series, is the Fourth Monkey series by J.D. Barker. This came out on Kindle. I think you can get physical copies and stuff now too. But when it came out, I saw that it was coming out, or the first book had come out on Kindle, and I was so excited to read it. And it just seemed really, really cool. So the whole premise of the Fourth Monkey is it's a serial killer story, and it's about this detective who's getting close to retirement, but he really wants to catch this serial killer he's been chasing for years, and they call him the Fourth Monkey Killer because he does it like his killings in a cycle. So he's kind of like Dexter a little bit in a way, where he usually kidnaps people who have done awful things or are bad people in general and like deserve to be punished. So that's I guess how he justifies his killing. But the 4 monkeys come into it because, you know, the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. That's what he does. So the first person he kidnaps, you have a certain amount of time. Then he starts cutting off body parts. So like if it's the see no evil monkey, like first the eyes go, then the ears go, then the tongue goes. And then I think the last one is, if I remember right, like the heart or something like that when they're finally dead. So like you have to try to find them or do what he asks. If I remember right, I mean, I read this book, I think 3 years ago or so. If I remember right, it was like, usually he said something to the effect of, you need to do such and such and such, and I will release the person, usually righting their wrongs of some kind. But the story is really good because you get in the mind of the serial killer. So you have the detective, the jaded detective who's chasing him, which usually I'm not big on jaded detectives because they tend to be overdone. And then the serial killer part is what made it so, so good. You get this guy's childhood and how he was raised. And there's a huge twist at the end that I was just like, holy fuck, like didn't see it coming. And so you kind of get into like his family and how he was raised and how he became a serial killer, which is really cool because you don't see that very often. It is now a series. I believe there's at least, I think I got rid of the sequel. I actually got an arc of the sequel, the only arc I've ever received. I won it in a Goodreads giveaway, and it actually, the book was released on my birthday in 2018. Yeah, so I read the first book like 4 years ago, and I never got around to reading it. I mean, it was thick, and I believe I have since donated it. Yeah, I felt really guilty that I didn't continue the series. I want to, but by the time it came out, that's when I had started getting into BookTube. I was like branching my reading out and not just reading thrillers. So I think that's why. And I do want to get back and read it eventually. I can get it on Kindle. That might be the way to do it and kind of get back into it and finish it. But from the reviews I'd seen, book 1, The Fourth Monkey, is way better than the sequel. Like the sequel kind of was like, not as good. But read Fourth Monkey. If you love serial killers at all, and that kind of stuff, like, which now that I'm looking at my list, most of these are serial killer stories. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 9 or whatever I have here. There are serial killer books. So maybe that's a pattern. Maybe that's what appeals to me the most is serial killer stories, which I guess is true. I do love serial killer stories. I find them more fascinating because especially if you can get into the mind of the serial killer, to me, that's way more fascinating than just this one-off, this guy's getting revenge or whatever. It's not as interesting to me as serial killers. So yes, The Fourth Monkey. I think you have to pay for it. It used to be on Kindle Unlimited years ago. Now J.D. Barker has just released a book with James Patterson, so he's getting traction. When Fourth Monkey came out, he was still an indie author, so you may have to actually pay for it now, but it's probably not that much money, I wouldn't assume, but still, it is totally worth the money. Next on the list is another book I read on ebook, Kindle Unlimited at the time. I think now they still are, because it has become a series. I've only read book 1, because book 1, I felt like it didn't need anything more than that, and that's The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchison. This is a story of a girl who is like in her early 20s, and she's kidnapped off the streets and held hostage by a serial killer. Only this serial killer does things a little differently. So he's rich, obviously, and on his property, he's got like this underground kind of like garden that nobody else knows is really there. And this is where he keeps the women. And I believe when the main character gets put in there, there's like 7 or 8 women already in there. And what he does is he calls them his butterflies, and he holds them down or ties them down and tattoos butterfly wings on their back. And each one is a different type of butterfly. And the sick twist is that when he's tired of them or done with them, or they do something to piss him off, he literally, you know, those scientists and stuff or bug collectors that have those cases where like they pin like butterflies or bugs or whatever in there. That's what he does to these women. He kills them, preserves them, and then hangs them on the wall. So it's very twisted. You follow mainly just her, but at the very beginning, she's talking to the FBI, so you know she's escaped. So then you're getting her story from the time she was kidnapped, her time in the Butterfly Garden, and how they escaped and all that stuff. It is so twisted and just so well written. Like, it was just fabulous. From what I've heard, the sequels aren't as good, and you're following like other set of characters, and it's a little bit different. So, and I didn't even decide to pick them up because The Butterfly Garden was just so good on its own. I felt like it didn't need a sequel. But again, another Kindle book that was absolutely fantastic. Next is an oldie but goodie, and I love it just as much as I love the movie, and that's The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. Everybody should know Silence of the Lambs. Again, another serial killer story. This is book 2. In the Hannibal Lecter, I think it's 4 books now. I have all 4. No, I lied. I only have 3. I didn't get Red Dragon because I don't like Red Dragon. I read Silence of the Lambs for the first time when I was 10, 11. So that says a lot about me. I'm due for a reread. I love Silence of the Lambs. It's Hannibal Lecter is one of the coolest serial killers that I think have ever been written. When the second or the third in the series, technically, Hannibal came out. Hannibal's like, I love even more than Silence of the Lambs. Hannibal is absolutely fantastic. And that one is way more twisted. And when the movie came out with Julianne Moore as Clarice, which I hated, Jodie Foster is the only Clarice Starling. They left out some of the best parts. Why is the doorbell ringing? Anyways, they left out one of the best parts in the story of Hannibal, and it just really, really upset me. So the books all the way. I'm very firm that usually the books are better than the movies. Silence of the Lambs is a classic. This tells, if you don't know what Silence of the Lambs is and you've been living under a rock, this tells the story of Clarice Starling, who is an FBI agent or just starting out to be an FBI agent. She wants to work in the behavioral science unit. They send her to go talk to Hannibal Lecter, who is a convicted serial killer, who's also a psychiatrist, and he would kill his patients, and he's a serial killer, and he's a cannibal serial killer. And so he's locked up in a mental institution, like lockdown with all of like the worst of the worst kind of deal. He can't be in regular prison because he will just kill people and eat them. He's very, very vicious and brutal, and he likes to get into your head. And that's one of the main things about him that's so great. And there is a serial killer called Buffalo Bill who is kidnapping women, skinning them, and making women or female suit out of the skins of these women. And so the FBI is trying to find Buffalo Bill, but they don't know where to look for him. They have a hard time pinning and making a profile of who this guy is. So they send Clarice in there to go talk to Hannibal, which, you know, they kind of end up with this really crazy bond. In the books, it's even better, especially in Hannibal. The bond that him and Clarice have, like, he would never harm her, though you can tell that she's worried that someday he might. And the series itself is really, really good. I have yet to read book 4. Book 4 talks about Hannibal's upbringing, like when he was younger, like as a child. So I have it, I just haven't read it. But the original is absolutely amazing. And Hannibal. I'm not a big fan of Red Dragon, but Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal are absolute must-reads if you love serial killer books at all. Okay, next is more of like an author recommendation, and that's Michael McDowell. Vicky kind of turned me on to Michael McDowell, and actually this bookmark that happened to be in Silence of the Lambs that from 2018, that is from a defunct Nocturnal Reader's Box, is actually, the picture is from a Michael McDowell book. So I've read 3 of his books. I've read The Elementals, Cold Moon Over Babylon, and Gilded Needles. All 3 are fantastic. All 3 very different. Michael McDowell is a very atmospheric writer. He's one of those writers that makes you feel dread, and where you can just feel the tension and the dread in your gut. But to me, they're not really scary. It's just more the tension and the dread that really gets to you. So it's more of like a suspense, I would say, more than like a thriller or horror, like a suspenseful horror. Most of his horror doesn't have much gore. There isn't much gore. I mean, there's a little bit, but not much. It's not like one of the other books on this list. But I love his books. The Elementals is about a beach house, and these families have these 2 beach houses on the shore. I think it's in Alabama on the Gulf of Mexico. And they've had them for years, and like there's all this drama in the family, and so they go out there for like one final summer, and the house next door that hasn't been used in years, that used to belong to a family that they were friends with that no longer is there, is slowly being filled with sand, and there's other weird things like happening with the house. And so it's so atmospheric and like creepy that you can feel the suppressive Alabama heat. You can feel the hot sand. You can feel it blowing on you. It's just so atmospheric. But this bookmark, which I kept out because see if you can see it. So that is from the Elementals, where it shows the sand all in the rooms. I mean, you can still walk around, but there's mounds of sand inside. Like it's trying to bury the house. And it's fantastic. Cold Moon Over Babylon is a ghost story that's kind of a ghostly revenge story that's pretty twisted, and I really enjoyed it. I did that as a prompt for a readathon. It was have your friend choose a book for you to read, and Vicky chose for me to read that book. And it was so good. That one I liked because I love ghost stories, and it was a cool twist on a ghost story. Gilded Needles, I read earlier this year with Vicky. It was one that her and I buddy read together. And that one takes place in the 1800s and is really twisted. It's a whole bunch of family drama. And that one was fantastic too. I absolutely love that one. Again, the atmosphere, it's like you felt like you were in late 1800s New York, or was it London? Either way, it was fucking fantastic. So if you love any kind of horror or suspense or thriller that is just so atmospheric and just really draws you in and makes you just kind of feel unsettled and creepy, pick up a Michael McDowell. The only issue is his books in print are very hard to find. He died, I think he died of AIDS in the late 90s, I think, something like that. He's been dead for quite a long time now, to where it's very hard to find his books, but all of his books are on Kindle, not Kindle Unlimited. They're on Kindle, so you can buy them for the Kindle. I know Vicky's got a couple, I think, in print. I think because she got the Nocturnal Readers box when they put the Elementals in there. I think she's got Cold Moon Over Babylon, which was also in a Nocturnal Readers box. But Gilded Needles, I believe I don't know if she got a copy of it or not, but hard copies are very hard to come by of his books since he has since passed away. So, but I highly recommend him. Even though he didn't write as very many books, they are so worth it. Next on the list, let's go serial killers. And this one is one that I recently read, not too long ago, but I stopped after book 2. I need to read book 3. Book 2 was not really my favorite, and that's Unsub by Meg Gardiner. I always want to say Gardiner, but it's Gardiner. These are really interesting, this series, because each book is based off another serial killer. So she works in behavioral science, but I think, is it San Francisco? Yeah, she's a detective. Yeah, I believe it's in San Francisco. It doesn't say right on the top, but I believe it's in San Francisco. She was hunting, her dad was hunting this serial killer called the Prophet, and many years ago, he never caught him. And so it was like kind of like the bane of his existence. Like it has since consumed him. And as he's gotten older, even though he's retired, he's had a lot of issues because the fact that he didn't catch him has really consumed him. Now it looks like he's coming back and starting all over again. The Prophet is based off the Zodiac Killer. So that's really interesting. Book 2 I read, I did that by audio. I can't remember the name of the book. I will insert a picture on the screen over here if I can remember. I believe I have it on my computer. Can't remember the name. Into the Black Nowhere? Maybe? That one was based off of Ted Bundy. That one I didn't like as much because it was different. Like in this one, you don't know who the killer is, like until the very, very end. And it's very action-packed, and you didn't know until the very end who the killer was. And I remember I listened to this one and the other one on audiobook, and they were fantastic. And you're waiting until the end, trying to figure out who the killer was. And it was great because, you know, like a normal thriller horror, like at the end is when you find out who the killer is, you have the big climax, whatever. In the second book, and it's based on Ted Bundy, like within the first 50 pages, she's found who the killer is, and she's just tracking him, and he's trying not to make a mistake. And it's kind of like the cat and mouse game, but he's freely admitted pretty much that he's the killer, but they can't prove it yet. And I just didn't like it as much. Like I prefer the chase and not knowing and stuff happening and them slowly figuring it out more to... instead of, oh, we know who it is, but now it's just like sit and wait and hurry up. So I didn't really like it as much. I want to read book 3. I just haven't picked it up yet, but it's still a really fun, fast-paced series. And I like that each one's based off a different serial killer. I can't remember which one book 3 is based off of. Sarah just read it, and I don't remember if she said or she was able to figure out who it is. Usually it says, but I know this one's Zodiac, and it's mentioned on page that, you know, this guy was pretty much copying the Zodiac Killer. And book 2 is clearly about Ted Bundy, which, you know, it's like a normal everyday guy, but who's really charming and all that stuff. And that's how he gets his victims, blah, blah, blah. It was very easy to tell, but I have yet to read book 3. I don't even think I have it on my Kindle. But I'll get to it eventually. It's just book 2 kind of let me down, but I still highly recommend at least the first one, at least Unsub, because I couldn't put it down. Another one of my favorites that's more of on the quieter side. It's more of a quiet sleeper thriller. I wouldn't even call it a thriller. It's more of like a mystery, like a quiet mystery with some family ties and friend ties. But there is still a little bit, but I wouldn't call it scary or thrilling, but it's still one of my favorites, and I still kind of put it in the category. And that's The Broken Girls by Simone St. James. I've also read The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James, which is also fucking fantastic. The Sundown Motel I consider more creepy scary. That one is a full-blown 1,000,000% ghost story that is pretty damn spooky, but is really good. Simone St. James writes her stories on both the Sundown Motel, which is down there, I'm not going to grab it, and The Broken Girls are done on 2 timelines. So there's always a present day timeline, and this one, it's 2014. So you have 2014 and then 1950 is the past timeline. And there's 2 stories running concurrent to each other, and they end up connecting at the end always. In the Sundown Motel, it's 2017 and 1984, 5, 80, somewhere in the 80s. That one is more familial. And this one, there is a girl, I can't remember her name. I read this like 4 years ago as well. What is the book of the month? No, 18, so only 2 years ago. Getting ahead of myself, but still. Okay, girl named Fiona, that's right. Okay, so there's a girl named Fiona. She's a journalist. Her sister was murdered, and her body was found on the property of an old all-girls school. What's the name of it? I can't remember. It's an isolated all-girls boarding school, or used to be, and it's since run down, shut down, and you know, her body was found. They are pretty sure they know who the killer is, but they can't prove it. They think it was one of her ex-boyfriends. So Fiona's trying to figure out who killed her sister. Meanwhile, at the same time, there is a legend of a lady in black that roams the grounds. Then you go back to 1950, and it follows 4 girls who actually go to the school when it was open. This takes place in Vermont. When the school was actually open, and you know how their friendship, they all came from different families and stuff like that, and one of the girls ends up going missing. Everybody thinks she ran away. These girls don't believe she ran away. They believe something happened to her. And then, you know, so you have both timelines, and eventually by the end they converge, and you figure out what happened to both women in both timelines. It was really, really good. It was really written. It's not very long, but I love her writing. It's very, very engaging. I love the female friendships part in here. And the Sundown Motel is like completely different, to where it is action-packed, fast, very all about the ghosts, kind of spooky, scarier. This one is more atmospheric in the spookiness, like think Vermont in like the fall, winter, and the ghost story in this is a little bit more minimal. It's more about finding out what happened to these 2 women, where in the Sundown Motel, it's where she's trying to find the main character in the 2017 timeline, trying to find out what happened to her aunt in the 1980s timeline. And it all centers around this old motel that's out kind of in the middle of nowhere in the state of New York. And there's ghosts, lots of ghosts. And it's pretty spooky. That one I would consider scarier. I mean, it didn't scare me. It was spooky. Scarier than this one. But this one I absolutely loved because it introduced me to Simone St. James. And if you haven't read this one yet, but you've read the Sundown Motel, you need to pick this one up. Next, I just want to touch on my shelf down here, because if we're going to talk horror, Richard Lehman is one of my favorite horror authors. I guess I could pick a couple of my ones that are my favorites, because I'm a dummy and didn't do that. Give me a sec. Okay, I picked 4 of my favorite Richard Lehman books. I have read every single book that Richard Lehman has published that I can get my hands on. I found him by accident. My mom or one of her friends, I can't remember which, had found one of his books in a thrift shop. They bought it, went home, read it, and they passed it on to me. And then I went online and decided to buy every single one I could get my hands on. The issue with Richard Lehman, which there isn't much, Richard Lehman is an acquired taste. Some people consider him part of the, what do they call it? Splatterpunk part of horror genre, the splatterpunk, where it's very gory, over the top gory. It is like ridiculously gory. I enjoy it. It doesn't bother me, but his books are not for the faint of heart at all. He's very well known for being very, very, very gory, very, very graphic sexually. And it's not even consensual sex. It is usually violent, like rape or sexual assault or something really terrible. It's never anything easy or nice to read. So if you have any triggers, to anything, never read a Richard Lehman book, is pretty much how, yeah, just don't, because you won't survive it. But they are all, I love them because they're fast paced. They're really gritty. It's like a horror palate cleanser. You know, like if you want to read like a fantasy romance or a romance because you just want to break, and you know it's fluff, and you know there's no real substance, and it's not like a great literary work, but you want to read it because you just enjoy it. That's how I find Richard Lehman. I read it when I just need a break and I want some horror and I know it's just going to be gross and gory, and and I read it, and it makes me, I'm like, I get what I need. The only issue is some of his earlier works are not that great, are not my favorite. You have to kind of take them with a grain of salt and, you know, go, oh God. Like some of them were just ridiculous, and I'd forgotten how ridiculous they were. But these 4 are probably my favorites. Again, Richard Lehman died in 2001 of a heart attack. He was never really popular in the United States. He was more popular in the UK, and he didn't really gain any traction over here until after his death. Sometimes his books are pretty hard to find. I find them a lot on Amazon, or Thrift Books will have them a lot. And they're almost always mass market paperback because, I mean, the man died 19 years ago. So it's hard to find his books sometimes. But on Kindle Unlimited, you can read all of them for free on Kindle Unlimited, which is great. Or most of them. Most of the more popular works. I have some that I found that weren't traditionally published, or they weren't as popular, so they're a lot harder to find. I mean, there's some, I have a list of all of his published works, and some of them you just can't find. But anyways, this video is already getting too long. So my favorites, Island is a favorite. This is a chunker. This one is what? This is a mass market paperback. It's over 500 pages, 504. So this is about a family who is on a boat, on a yacht, I believe it is. Yeah. On a cruise on a yacht, and they're all hanging out. The whole point is they're on vacation. They're going to hang out together. They're going to go swimming and all this stuff, and they're in the middle of nowhere, and their boat sinks, and along with any way to contact help. And there's a deserted island that is just offshore. So they all make it to the island. Shit starts happening on the island. They don't know what's going on. Then people start dying, and it kind of goes from there. The ending was not what I expected it to be, but it was like, okay, I see what you did there. But at the same time, like, again, major trigger warnings for sexual depravity in every single way. I don't think there's ever a normal sex scene in any of his books that I can remember. Most of them are vicious assault. So if you can handle that, I mean, it's horror, man. It's horror. So it's not like this is some nice, I mean, this is a lot of people haven't heard of Richard Lehman because of his content. It's one of those, unless you're really into horror, because he's very graphic, and a lot of horrors are to, you know, it's a splinter of, I own all the man's books. I absolutely love them. But Island was really good. Island was one of the first ones I read, and I need to read it again because it's been years since I've read it. Let's see, when was it published? This one was published in, well, this one says 2002. That's not right. 1995. It was republished in 2002. But so, I mean, it's a 25-year-old book. So yes, but Island is really good if you're, especially like summertime-ish. Body Rides was also really good. It's about a man who is driving along the road, and he sees this woman who is tied to a tree, and this man who is viciously raping her. And so he has a gun in his car, so he stops, and he ends up shooting the guy who was assaulting this woman and rescues her. Because, you know, he could not stop, and he knew the cops wouldn't be there in time. And so he kills the man, rescues the woman. This is not a spoiler because this happens like in the first 10 pages. And she gives him a gift. Now, the gift that she gives him is this bracelet. I believe it's a bracelet. Yeah, it's a bracelet. With this bracelet, you can take body rides. So you pretty much go into a coma, and your spirit leaves your body, and you can hitch a ride in anybody else's. You can feel what they're feeling. You can see what they're seeing. You can hear what they're thinking, and they don't know that you're there. You're just you're just along for the ride. The only issue is if your body gets injured or killed or whatever, like your actual body, like, I mean, you're in a coma. If somebody comes by and slits your throat, then your spirit's fucked because you have no body to go back to. So either you're stuck as a spirit, or you have to ride forever in somebody else's body. So and you know, then the story kind of goes from there. So he starts taking rides, and you know, then that's kind of how it goes. But this one is interesting because it's different than other horror books, but there's still some good horror in there. The first one, I think this was the first one I ever read. And that's The Traveling Vampire Show, and it's one of my absolute favorites. It's not as big as the other ones, but I just remember being so, like, aghast while reading it because I'm like, oh my God, this is, like, insane horror. So this takes place in the 60s. It follows 3 kids. Is it 3 kids? I believe it's, yeah, 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl. There's a traveling vampire show that comes to town, and all is not what it seems. And again, very graphic for vampires. But this one was one where I was just like, oh my God, I love this. I love his writing. This is so fucking twisted. I need more. And one of my ultimate favorites, which is also another huge 500-page mass market paperback, is In the Dark. In the Dark is about a librarian who is kind of by herself, lonely. Nothing really happens. And as she's checking books in, she finds a note in there that is left specifically for her and pretty much tells her she needs to go on this scavenger hunt. And she does, and things get fucked up and twisted. And it kind of goes from there. Again, I need to read this one, reread this one. But it was really, really good. From what I remember, I really, really loved it. So yeah, these four are like my favorite Richard Lehman books. Like I've read all of them. It's just been years since I have. I think when I was reading these, I was like 19, 20. I'm now 36. So I need to reread these. And I keep saying I'm gonna, and then I never follow through with my shit. But yeah, these definitely are probably my 4 favorite of his. Next is The Troop by Nick Cutter. I absolutely love The Troop. Read this earlier this year with Vicky. We read this together. This is the definition of body horror. This tells the story of a group of kids that are kind of like Cub Scouts, whatever. They go with their troop leader out onto this deserted island that's just away from the mainland. You can see the mainland from the island. It's used all the time for these troops to go and, you know, do their nature hiking and all that stuff. They go out there, there's a really big storm. This man kind of washes up on the beach and he keeps saying that he's hungry, and they end up getting quarantined there and shit goes downhill really fast. If you can't handle body horror or anything invading a body, like worms or bugs or anything invading your body, do not read this. If you can't stand over-the-top body horror, do not read this. This was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. I've heard a lot of his other ones aren't that great, but this one was really good, especially for the body horror. It was like, I hadn't been reading that much horror, and this was one when I picked up, it kind of renewed my love for horror again. I was like, okay, all right, there's still hope left. Next, because I've still got a couple left and I've already been filming for 30 minutes, fuck me. Next is Confessions by Kanae Minato. Kanae, I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. She's Japanese. I believe. Oh my God. Did I say that wrong? Yes, she's Japanese. This is one of the shortest horror novels I've ever read, and it's the one that's packed the most punch. The twists in this book are fucking insane. What was it? Page 50, I think. Vicky read this when she said she got to page 50. She was gobsmacked by the twist and it had never seen anything or heard anything like it before. And so I knew I had to pick it up. So I immediately bought it and read it. I mean, it's barely over 200 pages. It's barely over a novella. Fucking amazing. So this tells the story of a teacher in Japan who, she had a daughter and her daughter died, and she believes one of her students, one or more of her students, had something to do with it. So she sets on punishing those students and shit goes downhill, and the amount of insane like twists and turns that like you literally turn a page and bam, bam, like it's insane. I absolutely love this. If you have not read this yet, you need to pick it up. It's mind-blowing. Okay, the last two that I'm going to touch on. This is, I said I was going to touch on Richard Lehman briefly. This I'm going to touch on briefly. I'm going to try anything by Karen Slaughter, except for Pieces of Her. That book sucked. But The Good Daughter, Pretty Girls, her Grant County series. I have not read the Will Trent series yet. Karen Slaughter is fucking amazing. She's considered thriller. I would consider her borderline horror with the graphicness of her books. Her books are very, very, very graphic. Very graphic when it comes to anything like sexual assault, violence. Like, she's just very graphic, but fantastic. Her stories are amazing. Are they suspend your disbelief and a little over the top? Yeah. Is it also 100% worth it? Yeah. So if you have not picked up Karen Slaughter, I highly suggest you do so. Highly recommend, except for Pieces of Her. That book fucking sucked. I believe that's what it's called. Pieces of Her, whatever. I unhauled it the second after I finished, or no, I DNF'd it, then unhauled it because it was such trash garbage. But the rest are great. Okay, last on this list is one that I don't remember, who did I see it from? I think it was a booktuber. I don't know if it's somebody I don't follow anymore. It was years ago. And that's the Archie Sheridan and Gretchen Lowell series by Chelsea Kane. The first book is called Heartsick. I got them out from my library and that's how I read them. My library has the entire series. I believe there's 4 or 5 books. This tells another serial killer story, only the serial killer is a woman, which is very rare and unusual. And she's not like a poisoner serial killer. Like, she's a full-on cut 'em up, brutal serial killer. Archie and Gretchen are their names. So Archie is the cop, the detective trying to catch her, and Gretchen is the serial killer. So at the start of the book, Gretchen has already been at the start of the series. She's already caught. She's in jail. And it kind of tells Archie's backstory of him chasing her, him catching her, and all this stuff and everything that happened to him in the interim. And a lot happened to him during this process. And so he's pretty damaged. She's kind of taken hold of his life. He lost his marriage, the whole 9 yards. She's obsessed with him, but likewise, he's also obsessed with her. Like, he can't fully break away, even though she's caught behind bars. And it's kind of like the same, like, Silence of the Lambs-ish, where they need help from her. They also are trying to find her victims. She keeps withholding where she buried and got rid of her victims, and they're trying to find them so the families can get closure, and she will only talk to Archie. But every time she goes in there, she fucks with him, like fucks with his head, and it's just, it's so good. And then, of course, surprise, surprise, Gretchen escapes. And then he's trying to catch her, and it spends 4 books, and everything just gets all twisted and gnarly. And it's very much a cat and mouse, but they're both obsessed with each other. Think a little bit like Killing Eve, a little bit, only male and female instead of female, female. It's really, really good. It was one of those ones where it had been written years ago, and I was like, how the fuck did I not hear about this? This is why BookTube is great. But and they're easy to read. They're very readable. They're graphic, but not like Karen Slaughter, Richard Lehman level graphic. I mean, there's some death, but it's not like, you know, flay them open. There's no sexual violence that I can remember. It's, you know, minimal violence, minimal, not even gore. Minimal stuff, like people get shot. You know, it's not, you know, almost like a cop show, but a little bit more. But it was fucking fantastic, and it's well written, and just seeing the bond that these two have, even though it's so twisted and toxic, and oh my God, it's fucking amazing. I almost want to reread it. It's been a couple years, and it was really, really good. But book 1 is Heartsick, and hopefully I'll have a picture on the screen. I can't remember the name of the other ones, but they were just so, so good. I highly recommend it. Okay, guys, that's it. That is all of the books for my favorite thriller / horror. Like, you know, I went through my list. I tried to pick ones that people don't talk about as often. I mean, there's a couple in here that people talk about all the time, but I wanted to kind of give a little bit of variety. And I'm sorry you didn't get a November wrap up this year, but it is what it is. Please let me know in the comments down below if you've read these books, what you thought of them. What are your favorite thrillers and horror? Maybe if I haven't read it, it'll give me something to throw on my TBR. And other than that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.